go back into the church for the lunch. What I probably kind of was realizing, I was upset, I was so exhausted, but what I didn't realize at the time was also my blood pressure was ridiculously high when I saw the doctor the next week. He put me in the hospital. But I just knew that I couldn't go in because I didn't want to be comforted. I just didn't want to be comforted. So I thought, I'm just going to sit outside. It's a beautiful day, there's a bench. And as people come out, if they would like to greet me, that would be fine. But if I went in, there was hundreds of people there. And I was afraid of what the onslaught was. So as I sat there, people would leave a couple at a time. They would give me that knowing smile. And I think you probably know what I mean when I say the knowing smile. When you see people and you sort of know, I'm just going to give you your space. I understand what you're going through. I miss your dad too. And you smile and you nod and you make that connection, right? That knowing smile that you share with people, right? And that was really great. And a few people actually came up to talk. But there's only one conversation that I remember from that afternoon. And as I sat there with my belly out to here, a woman came up to me. And I cannot remember who she is. I remember what she said. I cannot remember who she is. And I know she was speaking words of compassion. I know she was speaking out of kindness. But she came up to me as I sat there, and she said, and when God closes one door, God opens a window. When God closes a door, God opens a window. And she looked at my belly. I smiled the knowing smile at her. And I know she was being kind. But you want to know what was happening inside my head? Inside my head, I was exploding. I was going, really? Really? Is that what your God does? Your God closes a door, but oh, yay, opens a window? And I'm going, like in my head, I'm thinking, really? You have no idea who you're talking to, and saying that to me is like the last thing I want to hear, because you don't know. If you want me to say who I'm going to pick between, if I had a choice between my father and my unborn child, are you really sure which door and window I'd be working with? But you see, I didn't say any of those things, but all of that was in my head. And I'm suggesting maybe others have experienced that when you're in deep grief, grief messes with your mind and with your heart. Because on another day, I might not have reacted that way. But on that day, I was ripped up, and those were not words of comfort to me. And so every time I hear that cliche, and I've heard it many times, I wince. I wince, and I think of my 30-year-old son who carries my father's name. Cliches are a tricky business. When people are in grief and hurting, God calls us to think about how is it that God is calling us to enter into this other person's pain. God is asking us to think about how is it and what is it that God is calling us to say or to do as we enter into this person's pain and suffering. We think about the families of the children of Newtown, Connecticut. And that feels like unredeemable pain. We know that Jesus redeems, but it feels like unredeemable pain, unbearable. And for any of us who've either experienced it or have journeyed with someone who has lost a child in pregnancy or in infancy or as a young child, you know, we often say it's not fair, it's not right, it's not the way it should be that a child should ever die before their parents. So I also want to say, it really doesn't matter what age the child is. Cliches are a tricky business when you're trying to explain the unexplainable, even out of the best intentions of your heart. And so what are we to do? What are we to say? And so we turn to Scripture to be helped with how is it do we respond in these unbearable circumstances. So we have the death of Lazarus, and we have Jesus now making his way back to Mary and Martha. And Martha encounters Jesus, and she lets him have it. She doesn't hold that expression inside her head. She doesn't bite her tongue. She says, "Where were you? Because I know who you are, Jesus. I know who you are. You could have saved him. You could have. Where were you?" Grief messes up your mind and your heart, and even when you know who Jesus is, you lash out. And Jesus takes it. Jesus takes it. And he says to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. I am right now the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life." And as they continue on, and he encounters Mary, and Mary's, well, she speaks those words too, and they're not quite so harsh. And then she just breaks down crying. She's weeping. And what do we hear that Jesus says or does? He weeps. He weeps. We know that this story is bigger than just that moment. We know that this story is pointing to Jesus' own resurrection from the dead. But at this moment in the story, it tells us powerful things about what to say and do with folks who are grieving. It's to come alongside, even if you're late. Even if you didn't get there to the hospital to visit. You come along later. You come along when you get there. Come along. Don't stay away. Come along. You weep with those who weep. And you're reminded that life is now. It's not just the future hope. We always talk about the future hope, the resurrection to come. Absolutely true. But we also talk about the life that is right now. Jesus says, "I am." Not "I'm going to be." I am right now the resurrection and the life. And we come along and remind people that it's okay to live with and through unbearable pain.